opinion on Sky News Australia starts now. This is Outsiders.
Good morning and welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to identity politics, woke political correctness and anti-Semitism on steroids. What modern Western universities are to logic, reason and the pursuit of intellectual enlightenment.
Hi everyone, we are live on YouTube with Columbia Anti-Semitic News, where everyone is welcome. LGBTQH...
H?
Hamas.
Yeah, I totally sim Hamas.
Yeah.
It's so trending right now.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Do you know why it's true? Because it rhymes.
Yes, that's a comedy sketch, obviously, but many a true word is spoken in jest.
Yeah, but I have no idea what Gaza looks like.
And they're smiling. Do hostages smile? Sinus liars.
Totally sus.
Do they think we're stupid?
Stupid? I major in queer post-colonial astrology.
Now, of course, that's just a gag, but here on Outsiders, if we've learned one thing, it's that reality always gets the most laughs.
Yes, that was a protest in Italy, and I can think of several rooftop bars in Gaza where they would be enthusiastically greeted with open arms before being promptly tossed off, as is Hamas's preferred method of dealing with those of a non-heterosexual persuasion. But now, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. Yes, well, we have seen the last few hours, days, Rita and James, the most disgusting displays of so-called pro-Palestinian support. Rita, Caulfield, a large Jewish area of Melbourne. Tell us about it.
Well, just, shocking scenes on the Sabbath, a synagogue having to be evacuated. Can you believe that? A synagogue being evacuated. Of all the places they could have protested, they decided to travel to the most heavily Jewish populated part of Melbourne on the Sabbath outside a synagogue. If you're not looking for conflict, why would you do that? If you're not looking to absolutely inflame tensions, and that's precisely what happened. It was anticipated throughout the day. And the statements we've had from our politicians, Rowan, the majority of them are just so pathetic, so weak, both siding this, talking about Islamophobia. When that has just happened, it is start with Zoe Daniel. She's the local member there.
So she's
member
the local
for Goldstein. She
right. So
South
this
Caulfield.
synagogue is in her electorate.
That's it.
And she's a teal.
So,
we won at the last election. Just remember this, our Jewish listeners and fans. This is the teal you voted for.
Now, this is her first post. She's posted another one, but there is a protest at Princes Park in Caulfield South tonight. I understand that this protest has affected worship at the AGS Synagogue. I would again urge empathy, compassion and understanding from everyone at a time.
So is that empathy for the bloke leaning out of the car with one finger in the air screaming abuse? Are we have to have empathy for him?
They want the Jews in their own community getting thrown out of the synagogue, evacuated because there's protesters outside and things are getting heated. She wants them to have empathy for those.
Can I make a point about that? And in fact, I'm glad you brought up the bloke raising his finger. I don't know if we can put him back up on the screen there, but this is one of these, not just pro-Palestinian, but pro-Islamist, I would say probably pro a lot of other things too, organizations. And he had it tattooed on his hand hand, if you look, the number is 1453. That's the year 1453, which is the year that Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Empire and fell to become Istanbul. This tells you an awful lot, I think, about what the real agenda here is. This is not just, all of this is moving, and there's a lot of other ones to talk about, but this is not just about Gaza. This is about much
let's
more.
make
It's
the
about
point,
a
let's make the
conflict
point,
with
James.
the West.
So 1453 or whenever it is, we have an open immigration policy into this country, and we are importing people who want to fight medieval wars from 500 years ago, 5 centuries ago, and we're importing them into this country, and that's the gratitude we get. We want to refight the invasion of Constantinople, James. Rita, you mentioned the weak response from Zoe Daniel. What about Anthony Albanese, James? What was his response?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, Anthony Albanese, and again, let's just also note that this wasn't just Caulfield. We also had people drive, again, an hour across town in Sydney to go to heavily Jewish suburbs in the eastern suburbs of Sydney to go and wave Islamic flags and Palestinian flags through these parts of towns, again, in an act of intimidation. Anthony Albanese goes, "This is a day," referring to Remembrance Day, "when we pause to give thanks for the sacrifices so many Australians have made to keep our nation free and peaceful. All of us have a responsibility to preserve that peace here at home, to maintain the harmony and respect that unites us. It is always worth repeating, there is no place in our nation for hatred or prejudice of any kind." Now,
so what's he doing about it? What is the Prime Minister doing about the scenes we saw yesterday?
Where is, you know, they keep both siding this, you know, and talking about
moral equivalence.
Islamophobia. I am not seeing big, you know, chauvinistic displays.
Well, let me just read out Peter Dutton's response.
Before we do Peter Dutton, because I think we should take note of what the Victorian leadership has done. This was in Victoria. Premier Jacinta Allen, pathetic response. Again, as James said, both siding this, no moral clarity whatsoever. She makes references to there is never any place for anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in Victoria. That's how she ends the statement, goes on
Islamophobia. So what we saw in Caulfield was Islamophobia, was it?
Obviously. John Prosciutto, our favourite opposition leader.
He'll have come in strong. This is the bloke who attacked a woman's rights march as being Nazis,
adjacent,
or next to, or linked it with Nazism. Has he linked Hamas to Nazis? Has he linked the pro-Palestinians to Nazis?
No. We got more both sidesing. He condemned the violence in Caulfield. Well done, John. That's a good start. But then he went on about our multicultural heritage, our rich tapestry, our bonds of humanity, just motherhood statement after motherhood statement. And, of course, it was, again, not an unequivocal slamming of what we saw, that we stand with the Jewish community, that we do not tolerate people going across town to intimidate the Jewish community on any day, but particularly on the Sabbath.
So we had no leadership there. We had no leadership from the Premier of Victoria, no leadership from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, no leadership. But we did have some leadership. Now, let's also, in a second, look at the scenes from Sydney, because they were just as disgusting, jet skis and bikes and heaven knows what. But here's leadership, folks. If you don't want Australia to turn into some Middle East ghetto of the sort that clearly the supporters of Hamas would like to see here, at least we have one leader, that is Peter Dutton, and here's what he said. "The behaviour we saw last night in Caulfield by individuals provocatively protesting in an area home to many people of the Jewish faith was absolutely disgusting. It was a deliberate act of incitement designed to end in violence, and predictably it did. These scenes have no place in our country and should be totally and utterly condemned. Well, not by anybody else, only by Peter Dutton. The Jewish community in Australia is rightly scared for their safety at the moment, and we all, that's all of us, have a responsibility to call out vile anti-Semitism when it rears its ugly head, and boy were those heads ugly as it did last night in Caulfield. Enough is enough. That's the man who should be Prime Minister of this country. If you have any sympathy for the Jewish plight at the moment, people scared to go out of their homes, scared to send their kids to school, recognise that Labor is no friend of the Jews. If you want to put an end to this, you must put Peter Dutton in the lodge. Now, next year, vote that way. People who have empathy or sympathy for the Jews have no choice but to turn away from Labor.
Well, you mentioned Labor, they've got their issues, but earlier this week we saw the Greens, that disgraceful attention-seeking tantrum in the upper house, led by Marine Faruqi, where they all stood up and walked out. I wish they stayed out.
Yeah.
But that was, again, James, that got attention around the world. That happened in the Australian Parliament. I mean, this is not painting a very good picture of the country at a time when, as Rowan said, the Jewish community is frightened. I know people who are frightened for their kids to go to Jewish schools, despite the fact that they've got the sort of security that you see at an airport. I mean, it is
unbelievable,
incredible levels of security, but and they don't want to have signs of their Jewishness visible sometimes because they are worried about physical acts of violence.
We need leadership on this issue. We are only getting it from Peter Dutton, James.
And the only thing that we are showing, I mean, aside from Peter Dutton, who has given a phenomenally strong statement,
yes.
You note that there's no trying to
none
put
of this
sides
Islamophobia,
in, no side, because
all of that rubbish.
There's none of that. What we're seeing here is that we have, in this country, we have a population of people who do want to push a divisive Islamist
100%.
agenda, and they want to make people afraid, and they want people to cower, and they want the authorities to cower. And sadly, that is largely what we've been seeing. We saw this on the first 24, 48 hours after the Hamas massacres. We saw that in New South Wales when
celebrating death.
When Chris Minns-Rowan, the Premier here, and his police minister, Yasmin Catley, allowed a group of pro-Hamas thugs to go take over the forecourt of the Sydney Opera House. Those pictures were beamed around the world, set off flares, scream, gas the Jews and F the Jews. The police just stood there and let them do their thing. Now,
and then they arrested the bloke with the Israeli flag,
and they arrested
who we had on this show.
The bloke Mark Spiro, who was trying to show his freedom of speech and his support for Israel. And the authorities here, by being weak, they just encourage more of this thing. This is not just a war. Just one last thing.
Yeah.
This is not just about, anti-Israel, not even about anti-Semitism. This is about weakening the West. This is a
100%,
fight between
100%.
the West, civilization, and barbarism.
And to prove that point,
the police are not standing up on the right side of this.
To prove that point, if Australia wants to see what the future holds under Labor or the Greens or left-wing thinking, have a look at what is happening in London now. We'll show you the scenes from London. Have a look at this. This is, again, Remembrance Day. The more important in Britain than Anzac Day is to us. This is Remembrance Day. This guy here was trying to sell some poppies. The police pushed him away. They pushed him away because he was being intimidated by Muslim activists, by pro-Palestinian activists. So the police turned the guy selling the poppies away, and his wife was in tears. They came along to do what they've done every year to commemorate Armistice,
when did they lose the war?
death. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We now see scenes in London, 300,000 up to 1 million, who knows, people marching across the streets of London. There you go. Have a look at that. That is pro-Palestinian. Now, if we want Australia to turn into that country, keep voting Labor, folks. If we don't want this for the future for Australia, we need leadership that says no way. And we've only seen one leadership to date, since the atrocities of October 7th, only one person has shown any leadership on this issue in this country, and that is Peter Dutton. I can't stress it strongly enough. We do not want that future that is occurring in Britain and America America, James? Tell us about America.
Well, before we get to that, those scenes out of London are shocking. But, I mean, you can only imagine how confused the Met Police there would be if they found out just what the Palestinian protesters' attitudes were towards pronouns. But that's a whole other issue. In America, we're also seeing the same thing. We've seen massive demonstrations. We've seen vandalism. We've seen a huge march. That's in New York City. That's my hometown. I grew up just blocks away from there. And again, my point, this is not about anti-Semitism, but it's also about anti-Westernism. This is about anti-Americanism. And this is the element that we now have in our cities that is emboldened by weak police responses. Also in Delaware, that's a march going towards Joe Biden's house, his beach house, where he seems to spend all of his time. Now, the thing is, though, this now, weirdly, could play well for Joe because he could say, oh, well, I'm being attacked by all these loonies to my left. But this just goes to show what they're dealing with in the United States. It's been brewing for a long time. It's been brewing on university campuses. It's been brewing through migration policies that have been largely failed and over-optimistic. It's a lot of things all coming together here in this.
He can't play the victim there, James. The attacks may be coming from his left, but it's from the left of his own party. He's got that terror squad in there. These people are now...
And I'm going to be talking about that later on.
Let's do that later. Let's go now to Senator Clare Chandler, who's, again, shown strong... moral clarity, talking about where all of this is coming from. Claire, always great to see you. Thanks for coming on a Sunday morning. You've pointed the finger. You've seen those shocking scenes in Sydney. We had jet skiers. We had motorbikes, all with Palestinian flags tearing around the place. You've made the point, you've written in The Spectator Australia this week, very clearly pointing the finger at Iran. Tell us about it, Senator.
Well, thanks once again for having me on the show this morning. And absolutely, I think that people need to understand that it is the Islamic Republic of Iran regime that has been largely responsible for spreading terror throughout the world and particularly throughout the Middle East and funding these groups like Hamas, like Hezbollah, that are now having such an impact in the area. And I think that risk has been very obvious to us in the West for a long time. But the reality is that the way we've all chosen to deal with this regime has clearly fallen short of deterring them from their behaviour at all. I've been talking about this issue for more than 12 months now, the need for our government here in Australia to take a stronger stance on Iran, and it hasn't happened yet. And now I fear, looking at what is playing out in the Middle East, potentially it's too late to take that strong stance.
Rita.
And we're seeing there's this Islamist ideology tolerated, sometimes even celebrated in the West. There does seem to be this bizarre alliance between the left and Islamists. They don't share many values, but they share a common enemy, being conservatives. Tell me about that dynamic, because it's evident not just in Australia, but throughout the West.
It certainly is an interesting dynamic, and I, remember from my own days in university politics, seeing that alignment, particularly on the left side of politics, and we've seen a lot of that playing out around the world and in Australia, particularly since the October 7 attacks. And I think that is incredibly disappointing. And the best way to push back against that, I think, is to do what Peter Dutton has done and condemn these clearly anti-Semitic actions, these anti-Semitic protests that we've been seeing across the country. And I think it's really disappointing that here in Australia, some of our leaders, including our Prime Minister, as you were saying at the start of the show, they don't seem to be comfortable clearly labelling this for what it is, which is the worst anti-Semitism that our Jewish community here in Australia has had to experience in our lifetimes.
James.
Claire, you've been very forward-looking on Iran, and I think probably belled the cat on this for a lot of people in Australia before they realised what a big problem it was. We have seen out of the United States increasing reports that Iran has a very strong influence peddling, if not influence buying operation involving people in the Biden administration. How have we seen any of that play out in Australia? Has Iran been trying to affect Australian diplomacy as well as part of the shift that started bizarrely under Barack Obama to reorientate the centers of power in the Middle East towards Tehran?
Well, we certainly know that the IRI regime has been engaging in foreign interference in this country. The Home Affairs Minister, Clare O'Neill, was very clear about that at the start of the year when she talked about an example of foreign interference in a speech that she gave at the ANU. But what's been frustrating since then is that the government hasn't been anywhere near so forward-leaning in talking about the broader risks that we know exist within the Australian community, and particularly within the Iranian diaspora. This is a wonderful community of people in this country who feel that they have been under threat from a foreign regime, from the Iranian regime back at home, and they feel like the government hasn't listened to them. So I think that's very disappointing. And when you look at the fact that our government has taken this sort of softly approach to dealing with Iran over the last 12 months, perhaps it's no surprise that we're now in a situation where, they're also not calling out, anti-Semitism when we're seeing it here in our community.
But it's worse than that, Claire, because as you point out in your article, a lot of this has got to do with money. The Iranians spend, $100 million a year, which they give to the Palestinians. But wait for it, so do we. Not that amount, but we give an awful lot of money, thanks to Penny Wong. We've increased the amount of money we're handing to Gaza, to Hamas, supposedly for humanitarian aid. The reality is that Hamas controls every single cent, every penny that goes in and out of Gaza. So therefore, we are literally directly handing our taxpayer dollars, millions of dollars, directly to Hamas via UNRWA and all the rest of it. They're the hands that it will end up in, whether it's aid or anything else. What can we do? This amount of money going into UNRWA was increased by Penny Wong. What do you say to that?
Well, this is certainly something that my colleagues and I in the Senate have pursued at Senate estimates and have asked the Foreign Affairs Minister about and DFAT about. And I think it goes to the broader issue that I've been talking about in terms of Iran for quite some time, but it applies to a number of bad faith operators across the board, is that we need our government to be very clear and very transparent about these relationships. And I think in some instances, particularly in the case of Iran, they need to be reducing those relationships to the absolute bare minimum of what they should be for us to be able to, deal with these countries if and when we have to. But again, this is something that the Iranian diaspora in Australia has been calling for quite some time, is for reducing those diplomatic relationships to a point where they are just at the minimum of what they need to be, because if we don't do that, then we are to an extent legitimising this very bad behaviour. And
Claire, just quickly, Q&A tomorrow. The ABC have got Francesca Albanese, no relationship to our own Prime Minister. She works for the UN. She'll be on Q&A tomorrow. She's basically saying, Israel's got to stop having a war with Gaza and let's have peace, beautiful kumbaya between Hamas and Israel. Alex Rivkin, friend of this show, who's come out and made the very strong comment that, maybe Francesca Albanese wouldn't be making such comments had her family been murdered, butchered, raped, mutilated, dismembered, etc. by Hamas. What do you make of the ABC? The public tax, again, our money going to the ABC, and they're basically allowing someone like Francesca Albanese to promote what is viewed by certainly people like Alex Rivkin as a very anti-Semitic position.
Oh, look, I think that some of the ABC's coverage since the 7th of October has left a lot to be desired. I don't think that's a groundbreaking statement by any means. And I know that many of your colleagues at Sky News have been very vocal in that criticism. But in terms of Ms Albanese, I certainly hope that if she's going to go on Q&A tomorrow night, then she will also be making it abundantly clear that Israel has a right to defend itself, and Israel has a right to push back against the dreadful, dreadful terrorist attacks that we have seen against them by Hamas. I'd be surprised if she said that, but that's what she should be saying.
We'd all share in your surprise, Claire. Senator Clare Chandler from Tasmania, thanks always for coming on the show. Keep up the great fight and for pointing out the real beast behind all of this is Iran and Iranian money. Coming up, lots more to come up. We'll be chatting to lots more people. Very exciting show coming up. Don't go away. Back with Rita's reality check in a second.
Welcome back to the highest rating program on all of Sky News, The Outsiders, with your hosts, Rowan, good old boy Dean, James, Yankee Doodle Dandy Morrow. And I'm Rita Panahi, and you may know me from other Sky News programs.
Which one? Which one?
Like
Which one?
Rita
Is there another?
Show.
The Rita
7
Panahi Show, 7 p.m.
Fridays.
Never miss it. Never miss it.
And of course, the Rita Panahi Show Overtime.
Oh.
That's Tuesdays on all your favourite digital platforms. And
Fantastic.
it was on
Never
Overtime
miss
this
that.
week that I spoke to Iranian-Canadian MP Goldie Gamari, whose family, like mine, fled Iran after the Islamic Revolution, and she has watched aghast as Islamist elements are imported, tolerated, and sometimes even celebrated in the West, when the very ideology she fled re-emerges in Western nations and is given cover by useful idiots on the political left. And you can't criticise what deserves ample criticism because of so-called Islamophobia. And one thing Goldie Gamari and other Iranians who fled the country have noted is the manner in which Islamists take over spaces to bully and intimidate. Now, sometimes the power displays appear very much peaceful. What could be more peaceful than prayer? But here Goldie Gamari explains why that may not be the case.
One of the ways that the terrorist Islamic regime in Iran, this Islamo-fascist regime, responds to pro-democracy Iranians within Iran who are fighting for freedom and democracy is they will take over their spaces and they will pray in front of them. And for a lot of people, they'll think, oh, well, they're praying, they're being peaceful, but it's not. This is a sign of conquest. This is a sign of power. And it is very concerning and it is very frightening to see these radical Islamo-fascist ideologies abusing the freedoms.
Taking over spaces, power displays to intimidate and send a clear message. And we saw that in Melbourne on Friday night when anti-Israeli protesters travelled to the most Jewish part of town, Caulfield, where more than 40% of the population is Jewish. And on the Sabbath, they forced the evacuation of a synagogue by protesting outside and causing scenes like this.
Have you guys lost control, the activists? This is one of the organisers. I'm just asking him if he's lost control.
Oh, the pepper spray's out! Stay back! Stay back! Shame on the police! Shame on Victoria!
The West better wake up to what is happening. This tyranny starts with attacks against the Jewish community, but it never stops there. Now, before we speak to our next guest, I want to bring you some superb highlights from the third Republican presidential debate. Of course, frontrunner Donald Trump gave the event a miss. He is flying in the polls despite facing a slew of politically motivated charges. The latest New York Times Siena College poll found Trump leads Biden nationally and among independents by a significant margin. And most crucially, Trump leads Biden in 5 of the 6 battleground states. And as the New York Times noted, the more diverse the swing state, the bigger the lead for Trump. The New York Times called it a racial realignment and noted that the only only battleground state Biden was winning was the whitest. But back to the presidential debate, which Trump skipped, but the 5 other contenders were there. And don't listen to the fake news. It was Vivek Ramaswamy who got the greatest reaction on the night from the Miami crowd. And it's why his clips went viral. And that's because he not only attacked his opponents, but turned his attention on the Republican Party machinery, the moderators they picked, and the rotten leftist media.
Do you think the Democrats, and we've got Kristen Welker here, do you think the Democrats would actually hire Greg Gutfeld to host a Democratic debate? They wouldn't do it. And so the fact of the matter is, I mean, Kristen, I'm going to use this time because this is actually about you in the media and the corrupt media establishment. Ask you, the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that you pushed on this network for years, was that real or was that Hillary Clinton made up disinformation? Answer the question. Go.
Mr. Ross.
Sorry. This is how we get our country back. We need accountability because this media rigged the 2016 election. They rigged the 2020 election with the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Mr. Ramaswamy,
and they're going to rig this election.
Your time is up.
Accountability.
Let me turn to Governor Christie.
He mentioned Kirsten Walker there, pushing the Russian collusion lies for years, but did she really do that? Well, let's go to the tape.
The president and his legal team are defiant as the Russia investigation intensifies. Still, it's creating yet another Russia-related flap for this administration. What you are seeing is President Trump increasingly embattled because of the Russia investigation and increasingly lashing out. New signs the Russia probe is reaching into new places. The Washington Post reporting special counsel Robert Mueller is investigating. I'm Kristen Welker at the White House, where President Trump gave his most direct denial yet. Have you ever worked for Russia? Yes.
I never worked for Russia, and you know that answer better than anybody. I never worked for Russia. Not only did I never work for Russia, I think it's a disgrace that you even asked that question, because it's a whole big fat hoax.
That after he didn't directly deny he was a Russian agent on Fox News.
After he didn't deny he was a Russian agent. Yes, he was 100% right. It was a big fat hoax. They all acknowledge that now. It was designed to undermine his presidency, and Kirsten Walker and many others were happy to push this obvious lie for years, and now the RNC picks her to moderate their presidential debate. What? And Vivek didn't just go after the media, he didn't miss Nikki Haley either.
You have the likes of Nikki Haley, who stepped down from her time at the UN. Bankrupt or in debt was her family. Then she becomes a military contractor. She joins the board of Boeing and otherwise, and is now a multimillionaire. So I think that that's wrong when Republicans do it or Democrats do it. That's the choice we face. Do you want a leader from a different generation who's going to put this country first? Or do you want Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels?
All right, Mr.
In which case we've got two of them on stage
Mr.
tonight.
Ramaswamy, thank you.
Dick Cheney in 3-inch heels. That's a good line. Then he said, we've got two of them on stage. That was a shot at Ron DeSantis. Likes to wear a little heel. Look, Vivek Ramaswamy is highly unlikely to be the candidate, but he is making a very good case for being the VP pick for Trump.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rita. Well, at 8 p.m. this Monday and Tuesday night, Sky News Australia will air the two-part documentary Liberals in Power. It is an in-depth investigation into the inner workings of the Liberal Party during Turnbull, Morrison, Abbott. I liked Abbott, but the other two, forget it. Anyway, its host, Chris Kenny, joins us now. Chris, always great to see you. Now, you've been working very hard on this doco. It screens Monday and Tuesday night. Looking forward to seeing it. What's the key, I guess, the key thing that surprised you when you were talking to all the various players that came out?
Great to talk to you, Rowan, James and Rita. Yeah, it's been a lot of work. I've been interviewing so many people over so many months, getting this documentary together with a couple of great producers in Mick and Richard while I've been doing my other show. And as you know, we've all seen this unfold. All of you guys have talked to the key players all the way along through that tumultuous decade. And still, though, even when you're sitting down face-to-face in lengthy interviews with the key players, what overwhelms me is just how personal and how organic these things become, how no one really has a clear, precise idea of how they're going to bring down a leader or reform the party or change direction. These things happen very organically, and there's all sorts of personal ambitions and ideological motives and personal relationships that come into it. But this piece really allows all the key players to tell the story. It's not me sort of making judgments about what unfolded. It's us seeing what unfolded and seeing what the lessons are to get the Liberals back into power again. And the thing that overwhelms me, of course, and, you know, many of us are old enough to remember it, of course, but after that Rudd-Gillard-Rudd chaos, the shambolic period of Labor government. When Tony Abbott won that thumping victory in 2013, he said, we're a government that means what it says and says what it means. You thought the whole dynamic had been changed. We were going to get grown-up government. They were going to be stable and get on with business. And, of course, that didn't happen. Tony Abbott was torn down by Malcolm Turnbull. And to my mind, that is the one act. That is the drama that changed everything. What should have been a strong period of coalition government was destroyed by Malcolm Turnbull taking down Tony Abbott.
And I would have thought, Chris, one of the key lessons was don't trust bedwetters. And I think John Howard says pretty much the same thing in your show. Have a listen.
There are those in the Liberal Party who say, really, to win back the Teal seats, you've got to implement the Teal agenda on climate change and other issues.
Well, you don't win anything back by embracing the other person's policy. The last thing the Liberal Party should try and do is be Labor light.
Worse than me.
Absolutely. Bedwetters. James.
And Chris, I mean, you know, one of the things that I expect we're going to see a lot of is talk about the different factions in that moderate faction. How much of a toxic influence did that moderate faction, being driven by Malcolm Turnbull, but with other players like Christopher Pyne, you know, who could not accept conservatives being in power, how damaging has that been to the coalition over that leadership period?
Well, in my view is that they've got to wear the bulk of the blame here, that it was that moderate faction that saw Malcolm Turnbull as their sort of as their leader, who was going to change not only the dynamic of the party but the dynamic of the country. They were deluded in that. One of the best interviews, I think, in the documentary is with Senator James McGrath, who was part of that push, was one of the key lieutenants to try and get Turnbull into the prime ministership, and he admits now that was a mistake. He shouldn't have done it. If he had his time over, he wouldn't have done that. But to be fair, John Howard points out that factionalism in the party is a problem, but he says both sides have to wear some of the blame. But there's just no doubt that the moderates thought that there was this new Camelot under Malcolm Turnbull, and, well, look how that turned out for them. It was disastrous. So they really need to pull their head in and understand that the Liberal Party functions best when it's goes with its conservative, right-of-centre, mainstream instincts with, you know, some deference and tolerance to the policy wishes of those so-called moderates or wets. But when they take over, you generally see electoral disaster. People got to remember, they keep saying, let's try and chase the Teal votes, win back the Teals. This was the first election last year when the Liberal Party, the coalition, went to an election with a climate and energy policy attempting to match Labor. They went with net zero by 2050.
And they got smashed.
That worked out for them.
Yeah.
And as Peter Credlin's pointed out, the data shows that 80% of those Teal voters have never voted Liberal in the past anyway. Yeah. So they're not just Liberal voters. But I'm just interested, Chris, are we going to have a trigger warning prominently on the screen every time Malcolm Turnbull, Christopher Pyne, Julie Bishop, these linos, Liberals in name only, are on screen? Because I don't want to have any broken TV screens. Will there be trigger warnings just to warn the audience?
Well, look, it won't surprise you, Rita, even though, full confession, as I have to confess often, I did work for Malcolm Turnbull as his chief of staff back when he was opposition leader and Tony Abbott took him down. Even though I have that history with Malcolm Turnbull, he didn't grant me an interview. He's not talking to Sky News anymore, is Malcolm Turnbull. Shame. But I must admit, I really enjoyed the interview with Christopher Pyne, because the difference with Christopher is he's out of politics now. So he's quite frank about it. And I agree with you that he's one of the leading moderates who was the problem. He really got on board with Malcolm Turnbull. But the difference with Pyne was he was always very close to Abbott. And he would have stuck with Abbott and been a pretty strong supporter of Abbott's if things had turned out differently. But I tell you what, there's some of them who just don't learn the lessons. They really think they really want to turn the Liberal Party into a Teal party, and that ain't going to work, as you just heard.
Certainly
John
not
Howard,
going to happen, Chris.
He's the oracle. He's the one who knows this stuff.
So I hope you interviewed Christopher Pine in the Cherry Bar, wherever that is, or whatever it is, where he plotted and did all his bit. Thanks, Chris. Good luck with the show. Monday, Tuesday night. That's Liberals in Power. Monday and Tuesday night here on Sky at 8 p.m. Coming up, lots more. We've got James Donkeyville. We've got Matt Canavan in a second to talk about Labor's outrageous obsession with net zero in a tick. You're watching Outsiders, the #1 rating show on all of Sky News Australia. And thank you for watching every Sunday morning and putting us in that position. We really, really do appreciate it. And many of you, as you watch Outsiders on a Sunday morning, will be having breakfast. But will you be having the sort of breakfast that Richard Marles enjoys? $115 was the cost of his breakfast.
How many people there? How many people?
Oh, it was just him. Just him. Just him for breakfast.
$115 for him.
How many Bloody Marys was on the tab?
And I think they watched his socks as well or something. But
well, when the taxpayer's paying, I guess you don't worry about a $20 orange juice. You pay $20 for one glass of orange juice. Coffee. Well, you pay about $14 for a cup of coffee. I mean,
lucky you didn't have a double, you know.
I hope it wasn't a double shot. I mean, the items here are just, these are US dollars, so we're translating it to Australian dollars.
Is there a sleeve of golf balls on there?
But this is just obscene to be spending over $100 for one person for breakfast. When you know the taxpayer's picking up the bill, you would think you would be at least go, okay, maybe I'll just... we'll have the coffee and not the orange juice as well, given it's $20 Australian dollars for one glass. What?
Well, someone who can fill us in perhaps on what politicians should be having for breakfast is, of course, Senator Matt Canavan from Queensland. Great to see you, Matt. You're there, out in the country now. Many politicians would not recognise the scene behind you because it's not the Canberra bubble and it's not an inner-city suburb like Marrickville. But this is the real Australia you're speaking to us from. Do you think many people in the, say, 100 kilometres near where you are, Matt, would enjoy a $115 breakfast courtesy of the taxpayer $20 orange juice?
No, I don't. I think you'd struggle to find a $20 orange juice up here in New England. My wife and I just had some breakfast at a lovely Vietnamese bakery, and I think it costs about $15. So we're well ahead.
You're well ahead.
It came out of our pocket. But did he have a power bowl or something? What the hell is that?
He did have a power bowl.
I mean, I don't. I mean, he seems to be being on a very good grass at the moment, Richard. But I don't think we're seeing any translation through to his performance because he's struggling to get extra funding through his cabinet, obviously, for the Defence Forces. That's a bit of a shame.
Maybe Chris Kenny could do another series, Labor in Power Bowl, all about Labor ministers with their noses in the trough enjoying the high life.
Different types of acai and who's got the best in the country.
Exactly. Now, Matt, we got you on to talk about net zero. So on Melbourne Cup Day, while the nation was, distracted with horses, farting horses, I imagine, Labor decided to release its net zero policies, which, of course, flew under the radar. But this involves, and I'm glad you are standing in the country there, because this involves a massive hit and potential destruction to farming, to industries, to agriculture, to land. Tell us what they're trying to do with this net zero lunacy.
Well, the Labor Party signed up to this global methane agreement last year. They did so a bit quietly, like they've done this week. And under that agreement, they've got to cut methane emissions by 30%. And some of the biggest, apparently the biggest emitters of methane, I don't make up the rules, but these are the carbon rules, come from cows. And so to cut 30% of emissions from cows, what are they going to have to do? Almost all the experts say you're going to have to reduce the number of cows around. You have to reduce the amount of beef we produce. You're going to have less income and economic opportunity out here in country areas. That's exactly what's happening in Europe, where they're implementing these policies. Right now, the Netherlands is doing this very thing, and they're openly looking to buy back and cull the 30% of their cattle herd. Now, the Labor Party is still saying, we're not going to do that. It's all okay. But that's what they said last year when they signed up to this agreement. They said, we won't do anything about it. It's just an agreement. It won't actually translate to anything. And then, as you say, this week they've announced that no, the Agriculture Minister has said the Agriculture Ministry has to cut their emissions by 30%. We're going to make sure they do it. We're just yet to see exactly which parts of the country are going to be hit by this policy.
James.
And tell me, you're up in New England right now. What is the reaction of people on the ground who work in these sectors whose livelihoods depend on it, who have for generations been feeding Australia and the world? You know, I'm looking behind your shoulder there, Matt, and there's a noticeable lack of solar panels and wind farms there. And all I'm seeing
probably coming. I think they're coming this way.
And all I'm seeing is planet-killing grass and trees. What are the reactions of people on the ground? And in seats that Labor took off of the coalition in the last election, is this going to become a big election issue when we get that next election in maybe 18 months?
Well, I reckon this will be an issue for all Australians because the way it's going here, the next time you go to a pub, you won't be debating whether to have chips or salad with your steak. It'll just be chips or salad. You won't get the main course, and that'll affect everyone in the country, regardless of whether you're out here in the bush or not. Because we can see meat prices in the shops already going up. Beef's very expensive right now, and so what's going to happen if governments around the world cut back on cattle production by 30% according to this agreement? It will push the price of beef up enormously, and that'll affect everybody, including, as you say, in seats where the Labor Party holds. And in terms of up here in the bush, people have just had a gutful because, as you say, there's no wind turbines on the hill behind me, but they are coming to a town near you. In almost every town in the country, there's a revolt here against these planet-destroying, koala-killing wind and solar factories. They're just blanketing our landscapes, taking away the beautiful, pristine natural landscape we have. And even worse, they're not actually doing anything that helps us. Your electricity is not getting better, it's just getting dearer. So the more of these wind factories and solar factories we put up, the higher your price of power goes as well. We destroy our natural environment and pay more for power at the end of the day. Apart from that, James, it's an excellent deal.
Now, the Prime Minister, Matt, was at the Pacific Islands Forum. He had the checkbook out. Everyone's getting our money. But he also signed this agreement to accept climate refugees from Tuvalu. Tell me about this. I mean, the last time we had some data on this, wasn't that country actually growing in land mass? But he made it sound like they're about to sink into the ocean any second now.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And the worst thing about the whole climate debate is the lies. The constant lying that occurs to the Australian people about what is actually happening on the ground. Now, clearly what Tuvalu wants is some extra funding from the Commonwealth Government. Tuvalu people would like the opportunity to move to Australia, obviously, and they're using this climate paranoia to further their ends. Good luck to Tuvalu. But we're just gullible enough in the West to buy all this when, as you say, all of the evidence and data shows that Tuvalu is actually growing. It's been growing over the past couple of decades in size, hasn't been shrinking. And so this sort of idea, but it's written up in the Australian papers as if the oceans, the tides are lapping at the doorsteps of the poor people of Tuvalu, and they need to be airlifted out ASAP before they all drown. Nothing could be further from the truth. So, we're just going to have to cop higher amounts of migration, apparently, under this Labor government. I don't think we were promised that before the last election. I don't think Anthony Albanese levelled with the Australian people that he wanted to take migration levels to about double what they normally are. And that's what we're having right now. And that's why housing is such an issue. It's why the cost of living is going up so high. And we need to have a real question about why are we taking so many people in this country when Australians who live here don't have a home to live in.
And the climate catastrophists, even at the ABC, said that, Tuvalu had grown by 2.9% of usable land with the latest data. I think that came out in 2018. But is this going to set a precedent? Are we going to see other countries say, well, climate refugees are being accepted from Tuvalu, so why not from our countries? Is that going to put pressure on us to have similar agreements with other neighbours?
Yeah, so this agreement with Tuvalu is apparently only for a couple of hundred people, but exactly right. Once we sign this for Tuvalu, there'll be every country, every man his dog will want to be a climate refugee. And of course, that's not because they're escaping climate, it's because they want to come to the great country that is Australia. And we saw over the last few decades that people would claim political asylum, be political refugees when they clearly weren't. They were economic refugees. That door's been shut thanks to the former Abbott government that stopped the boats. And so now we're going to see, instead of being political refugees, they'll be climate refugees, when really, they're simply economic refugees that want a better future. I don't know why they're all coming to Australia, though, because how haven't we been all told that the climate change is going to devastate this country? We'll be constantly in bushfires.
And also there will be no
It's
cows.
amazing.
They won't have any food because there won't be any cows. James.
It's amazing, Matt, that all of
If
these...
we have to offer asylum for climate, we shouldn't be this country. I think we all need to go to Siberia, don't we?
I know. It's amazing, Matt, that all of these people from all over the world want to come to this, climate-affected racist hellhole that the left keeps telling us it is. But on that issue, though, of migration, we had some really interesting figures come out this week that showed that Australian standard of living had dropped by 5.1%, the greatest of any major economy. And a large part of that, they said, the economists said, was due to the surge in migration. That's their words, not mine. Is the coalition going to be prepared to do something about this big Australia policy, which I think both sides of politics have been, very open to because big business wants it? And so, if big business wants it, then, well, the rest of us just have to cop it.
Well, let's be very clear. The surge in migration that we've seen has happened since the election. It didn't happen before, it happened since the election. And as I said, that wasn't something that Anthony Albanese took to the Australian people. And he and his government has a lot of responsibility here for the greatest reduction in living standards anywhere in the developed world because they've taken all this migration without thinking about how it affects our infrastructure, our housing and all the other costs that have then rebounded on Australians. When we were last in government, we actually cut the migration intake before COVID. Obviously, then we closed the borders during COVID. But before COVID, we cut the migration intake because we did think there were too many people coming to the country. So I hope, and Peter Dutton was the immigration minister where that happened. So I hope that Peter Dutton will look at this. I've raised this in the party room. I'll leave it to Peter Dutton to make announcements before the election. But I definitely think that this country cannot take the size of Canberra every year coming into our nation, certainly not with the red tape and restrictions we have on development right now. We need to match our migration intake with our ability and capacity to take in people. We have no responsibility or duty to take in a certain amount of numbers of people from overseas. We need to make sure that those numbers, the migration policy we set, is in the best interest of Australians, regardless of what the rest of the world thinks of us.
Senator Matt Canavan, always great chatting to you. Enjoy the rest of the day up there in New England, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thanks so much. After the break, I'll look at the fear that Jewish people are experiencing right now. Don't go anywhere. Outsiders. More in a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow and with myself, Rowan Dean. Now, we all enjoy a bit of a satirical humour now and then, and Babylon Bee is always worth checking out. Last week, the US hard-left Democrat Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib tried to play down the genocidal anti-Semitic slogan "From the river to the sea" by saying it was simply an aspirational cry for freedom, to which the Babylon Bee responded with this bit of satire. Rashida Tlaib says Heil Hitler was just an aspirational call for freedom. Okay, not bad, and there have been plenty of other comparisons between Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests, and the Nazis. Some funny, some less so. Now, the gag always used to be that whoever invoked the Nazis first in a political argument lost by default. And it's usually true. But over the last few weeks, alas, that is no longer the case. The bloodthirsty massacres of October 7th and the resulting outbreak of Jew hatred around the world bear all the hallmarks of Hitler and the Nazis. We have seen the Star of David graffitied on Jewish homes in, of all places, Berlin. We have seen a terrifying increase in physical attacks on Jews, including here in Australia and overseas. Some have resulted in death. No wonder Jews are getting very, very nervous.
All the images that we grew up with, swastikas, harassment, stickers and boycotts of Jewish businesses, we're now seeing here in Australia, and it is deeply disturbing. I'm now asking myself sometimes, do I need to hide my Jewishness to be safe? Are my children safe?
The other day, Israel's ambassador to the UN felt so sickened by events that he wore a Nazi-era yellow star. This week, the front page of the Australian newspaper contained a letter, and good on them for putting it on the front page, a letter from 100 Australian Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. writing a plea for an end to anti-Semitism in Australia and for Australians to stand with the Jewish people. They were writing it on the 85th anniversary of the evil night known as Kristallnacht. Crystal Night, so called because of all the broken glass everywhere. Kristallnacht was, of course, November the 9th, 1938, when Hitler's thugs, including the Hitler Youth Movement, yes, kids, smashed, shattered and looted Jewish homes, shops and businesses. Mob rule broke out, looting, rapes, suicides. Thousands of synagogues and buildings were torched and vandalised. Despicably, as Hugh Green reported in the UK Daily Telegraph at the time, quote, racial hatred and hysteria seemed to have taken complete hold of otherwise decent people. I saw fashionably dressed women clapping their hands and screaming with glee, while respectable middle-class mothers held up their babies to see the fun, in inverted commas. Nowadays, of course, they just hold up their iPhones. We saw echoes of the same mass insanity following October 7th and indeed during October 7th. The glee with which women, children were tortured, babies decapitated, the desecrated bodies of raped and mutilated Jews then paraded around Gaza, and the sheer joy and enthusiasm of the crowds who ran after them, and indeed the crowds who cheered them on around the world. Far from comparisons with Hitler and the Nazis being extreme or exaggerated, they are now, if anything, understated. And a warning, some may find this next video distressing. Crowds beating the dead body of a Jew in Gaza and cheering. Is it really all that surprising? History suggests that the comparisons between the modern anti-Semitism fueled by pro-Palestinian sentiments and Hitler's anti-Semitism are no coincidence. Meet Haj Amin al-Husseini. According to author David Dallin in his essay Hitler's Mufti, quote, it is possible to trace modern Islamic anti-Semitism back along a number of different historical and intellectual threads, but no matter which one you choose, they all seem to pass at one point or another through the hands of one figure, Hitler's Mufti, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the viciously anti-Semitic Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the leader of Muslim fundamentalists in Palestine, who resided in Berlin as a welcome guest of the Nazis throughout the years of the Holocaust. As David Dallin writes, from his earliest years, al-Husseini was a ferocious opponent of Jewish immigration to Palestine, with an unrelenting hatred of the Jews and the British. His career as an anti-Semitic agitator and terrorist began on April 4, 1920, when he and his followers went on a murderous rampage, attacking Jews on the streets and looting Jewish stores. He was subsequently convicted by a military tribunal of inciting anti-Semitic violence that resulted in the killing of 5 Jews and the wounding of 211 others. On August 23, 1929, al-Husseini led a massacre of 60 Jews in Hebron and another 45 in Safad. In late March 1933, al-Husseini contacted the German Consul General in Jerusalem and requested German help in eliminating Jewish settlements in Palestine, offering in exchange a pan-Islamic jihad in alliance with Germany against Jews around the world. On November 28, 1941, Husseini met for the first time with Adolf Hitler. As another author has correctly argued, Quote, al-Husseini owes his place in history to this meeting where he offered to raise an Arab legion to help carry out Hitler's extermination of the Jews. Quote, it is hardly accidental that the beginning of the systematic physical destruction of European Jewry by Hitler's Third Reich roughly coincided with the Mufti's arrival in the Axis camp. Joseph B. Shetman pointed out in his 1965 book, The Mufti and the Führer. Quote, the Mufti's close ties to Hitler and his total embrace of Hitler's final solution, concludes another author, provides the common thread linking past to present. At the Nuremberg trials, Adolf Eichmann's deputy, Dieter Wislincini, was even more explicit. Quote, the Mufti was one of the initiators of the systematic extermination of European Jewry and had been a collaborator and advisor of Eichmann and Himmler in the execution of his plan. He was one of Eichmann's best friends and had constantly incited him to accelerate the extermination measures. This is a quote. I heard him say that, accompanied by Eichmann, he had visited incognito the gas chamber of Auschwitz. On his visit to Auschwitz, al-Husseini reportedly, quote, admonished the guards running the gas chambers to work more diligently.
There are already photos of the Grand Mufti, Hitler, and Himmler circulating the internet, but the Nazis in these photos are less high profile. Kedem speculates that they include Arthur Seyss, Inquart, the Austrian Reichskommissar of the occupied Netherlands, Fritz Groba, Germany's ambassador to Iraq, and Iraqi politician Rashid Ali al-Gailani. Allegedly, the Grand Mufti's ties to the Nazis pressured the British to oppose Zionism during World War II, under fear that the Arabs would side with the Axis powers.
What a vile figure. But alas, that was just the beginning. As David Dallin also writes, quote, after the defeat of the Axis powers, Haj Amin al-Husseini escaped indictment as a war criminal at Nuremberg by fleeing to Egypt, where he received political asylum and where shortly after his arrival, he met the young Yasser Arafat, a teenager then living in Cairo. Arafat's mother was the daughter of al-Husseini's first cousin. Arafat soon became a devoted protege of the Grand Mufti, who brought a former Nazi commando to Egypt to teach Arafat and others how to fight. In 1969, for example, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization run by Arafat, recruited two former Nazi instructors, Erich Altern, a leader of the Gestapo's Jewish Affairs section, and Willy Berner, an SS officer in the Mauthausen extermination camp. In a major address as recently as April 1985, Yasser Arafat said he took, quote, immense pride in being the Mufti's student and emphasized that the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, quote, is continuing the path the Mufti set. Arafat, of course, is the man who became the leader of the Palestinians and rejected Israel's offer, many offers of a Palestinian state. According to historian Robert S. Bistrick, quote, there is currently a culture of hatred in the Arab Middle East which has not been seen since the heyday of Nazi Germany. Now we come full circle. Here are a group of pro-Palestinian radicals chanting, just last week, only one solution.
There is only one solution! There is only one solution! Intifada revolution! Intifada revolution! There is only one solution!
There is only one solution. Were they deliberately referencing the final solution? You decide. But at the same march, the words Holocaust 2.0 were scrawled on the pavement at a Western university. And if that's not quite specific enough for you, here's a radicalised pro-Palestinian using her own children in a sick sketch on social media. That may be her sick fantasy, but here is the reality, and I apologise again for how disturbing the footage is. I'll only play 10 seconds of what is several minutes long from the aftermath of the massacre at, ironically, the Peace Festival. And those blurred images were, of course, dead bodies. So, we either learn from history. Those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. So please, let us learn. But let me end on an optimistic note. Do all Arabs hate Jews? Of course not. Especially those Arabs who actually live in Israel.
My mother is penniless and illiterate. She doesn't know reading and writing, because her parents didn't believe that women have the right to go to school. If not Israel, I probably would be illiterate, penniless, herding sheep somewhere in Galilee, right? But I have electrical engineering degree. I have masters from Stanford University. And I have my rights to live my life the way that I wanted to live them. Israel gave us everything that it could give us, even though we were Arabs. And people are talking about apartheid and ethnical genocide. It just doesn't match the truth. It doesn't match the reality. They need to go and read the facts. And it's funny that sometimes it comes from intelligent students at elite universities saying this kind of nonsense.
Now, let's try and lighten the mood a little with some wackademia, but unfortunately it's not that lighter. Have a look at this. This is a collection of basically what kids are being taught in universities in America. I hope it's not happening here, but I dread to think. Have a look.
A&M professor asks, when is it okay to kill whites? New York professor says having a white nuclear family promotes white supremacy. Professor tweets that white people should commit mass suicide. College professor says kill cops, kill all white people, and kill the straights. Professor says all I want for Christmas is white genocide. Georgetown professor says all white people are racist. Trinity College professor calls white people inhuman. Let them die. College professor says believing in hard work is a white ideology. College professor says white people are conditioned to commit mass murder. A professor equates math with white privilege. A professor says white supremacist patriarchy is responsible for the Vegas shooting. Professors hold a white racism course at FGCU. USC professor calls for a Holocaust against all white people.
So, James, I don't think I'll be signing up for a US university.
Well, I mean, I'm going to be talking a bit more about what's been going on at some universities, prestigious ones like MIT, after the break. But, it is absolutely crazy what is being taught in schools. And I alluded to this earlier, a lot of what we're seeing here, a lot of the just broad sort of leftist sympathy for the Palestinians, where the left used to be on the side of Israel, stems from decades of being marinated in this sort of, to use the academic word, discourse, which is incredibly racist, incredibly toxic. Then, you take it to the current situation. Oh, well, Israelis, well, I guess, yeah, Jews are white people, so let's just hate on them too. And that's where we are today.
Even though under Hitler, the Jews were brown people. But anyway.
Well, that's the thing. But they're not white people. If you've been to Israel, they're not.
Sure,
but it doesn't matter. Their colour doesn't matter. It's the fact that they are
Western.
Successful, and they're Western, but they're successful. And that's this entire Marxist mindset of the oppressor and the oppressed. So the Israelis are successful, the Jewish community is overwhelmingly successful, so they must be oppressors, they must be evil, and whoever is against them must be the downtrodden that we have to stand by. It is that stupid and simplistic.
If you looked at that clip of the Arab girl, the Bedouin girl that I played, she was a Bedouin girl, her mother was illiterate, no learning whatsoever. Because she grew up in Israel, she had to go to school. She's now at Stanford, she's a successful entrepreneur, etc. And thanks Israel for it. The joke is, that Israel has been accused of being an apartheid state and all this sort of stuff, and nothing could be further from the truth.
No, but of course, what we've seen set up here over decades and decades, if not centuries, on the left, in academia, and across all sorts of intellectual, so-called pseudo-intellectual sort of worlds, is this aristocracy of victimhood. Yes. So everything winds up coming down to victimhood, and so suddenly, if once the more of a victim you are, the more bad behaviour you can get away with. And
well, we've got a great example of that. That's perfect. Okay. Perfect segue. Let me just quickly play it because this is so funny. This is a girl who was arrested for drink driving in America. This is fantastic. And she tries every victimhood card, one after the other, James and Rita, to get out of it without much late. Have a quick look.
Why are you driving in the wrong way of traffic?
No, I just got changed around. I just moved here like 2 months ago. I just have like really bad social anxiety and stuff as an Indigenous person. I'm non-binary, so.
Okay.
She goes to them, I'm Indigenous, I'm non-binary, I've got social anxiety. The cop just says, can you walk in a straight line? No.
Well, she should have just played the great classic Australian line, I'm just waiting on a mate.
Yeah, exactly. Rita, sorry, I interrupted you before.
Oh, I can't remember what I was saying now. So
it was good.
It was very good.
That goes without saying.
And now everyone misses out. So well done. No. I was just going to mention, it doesn't even matter how much genuine victimhood you have, because they will dismiss that. This is the thing with the left.
Of course.
Their principles are entirely changeable depending on the situation. So you can have someone who's got genuine, look at Jacinta Price, you look at her background, what she's endured, everything she's faced. She should be a heroine of the left, but no, they absolutely loathe her. They don't allow her lived experience to be any sort of a factor. It's all about, like James said, this anti-Western sentiment, and the Israelis being successful is their biggest problem, the Jewish community in general. And if you want to know why they keep coming after the Jews, a big part of it is because they're a successful minority group. So they're easy targets.
But also, I think, James, you touched on it earlier, and please, expand on this thought. This is an attack on Western civilization, correct, and that's the heart of what we're seeing in London and America. We don't want it to happen here, but it is starting to happen. We need leadership which says, no, this cannot go ahead, because it is an attack on all the values that we hold dear.
And this is why, Rowan, we've seen really, really disgraceful behaviour by the Met Police in London, by a lot of the authorities around the world, as discussed here. But, attacks on the cenotaph, in London. These are, and in other cities. I saw in France a similar memorial to the unknown dead of World War I, also attacked on Remembrance Day, the sacred day in these countries that experienced the horrors of World War I. And so by attacking these things, they are not saying, oh, we just want better outcomes for people in Palestine. This has nothing to do with it. The Palestinians are almost incidental at this point to these people, because the goal is the weakening and the undermining and the eventual replacement of Western democracy with something else. This is the thing that I have always said here. It's lovely to say multiculturalism, we can all get along, but eventually that just becomes a transition phase, because liberalism, the Western liberalism that allows all the freedoms for everybody to get along, eventually someone comes and realizes you can use those freedoms against the system to shut it down. And that's what we are approaching.
Yeah.
Well, we're well underway, I would argue. We've had decades of that just being pushed. And we talked about some of the nonsense that you hear about Israel, the apartheid state, and how untrue that is, and anyone who's been there. But the other common lie is genocide. They're committing genocide. Now, you look at the Palestinian population, it has gone up 500%.
Right.
So if they're committing genocide, they're bloody bad at it, I've got to tell you that. So, but you hear this, and it's just repeated as it's a statement of fact. You hear academics say it.
Yeah, but you hear these clowns at these rallies, and this is where parenting and leadership is so important, because you actually ask them, sorry, which river, between the river and which river? Oh, I don't know. So they're just mouthing this stuff. Now, in a second, we'll be talking to Mike Duran, which will be fantastic. I haven't chatted to him for a while. We're going to take a short break. Coming up then, James Donkey Vote. Lots happening here on Outsiders, Ice Age Watch, you name it. See you in a tick.
Welcome back to the program. I'm James Morrow here, as always, with Rowan Dean and Rita Panahi. And in a moment, we'll be joined by geopolitical expert Mike Doran to talk about the breaking news that Foreign Minister Penny Wong has called for a ceasefire in Gaza. But before we get to the latest going on with the Hamas caucus in Washington, D.C., I thought we should check in on the state of American education. MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, is one of the world's preeminent institutions for the study of math and science and all those other terribly racist doctrines. Its graduates include the likes of architect I.M. Pei, physicist Richard Feynman, astronaut Buzz Aldrin, and even the actor James Woods. But not even MIT, with its love of rationality, has escaped the current idiocy that is turning America's classrooms into Maoist cauldrons of hate. Have a look at what happened in this class on Wednesday morning at MIT, and keep an eye on the fidgety fellow on the lower right hand of your screen.
Plus minus c times the rest. So minus c times lambda d plus mu b prime, and you find the formula.
Now, I got a feeling this chap doesn't have a burning question about derivatives or Kronecker products, but have a look.
Go ahead.
As we witness the ongoing genocide of Gaza and MIT silence, I'm joining hundreds of students citywide in walking out of class to Lobby Center, because we stand for the liberation of Palestine against the active genocide perpetuated by MIT, Israel, and the United States. Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
Free, whatever. And, you know, that's not the half of it. Even more sinisterly, Jewish students were prevented from going to class by demonstrators. And so far, the administration has refused to suspend anybody for this disruption. This is, of course, just a brief glimpse into the stupidity that has infected colleges and universities across the U.S., and I hate to say Australia too, especially the Ivy League, which means that in a move no one saw coming, degrees from party schools are now more valuable than ever. But it's not just higher learning that has been infected and let's call it out for what it is, pro-terrorist idiocy. The Hamas caucus in Washington, D.C., where Democrats this week rallied around the flag, not the U.S. flag, but rather the Palestinian one, to defend one of their own who'd been caught out posting a video in support of the Palestinians featuring the charming chant, "From the river to the sea," which, despite the best efforts of apologists who like to say it's complicated, means only one thing: clearing the Jews from Israel as called for by the Hamas Charter. This is, of course, a common thing to hear at anti-Israel protests around the globe, such as this one in Melbourne. Note all the folks wearing keffiyehs and carrying the so-called Palestinian flag, which is actually the flag of the relatively charming folks at the PLO. Of course, to people like Rashida Tlaib, the statement is all about coexistence.
I want you to explain, what you mean by it and why you used it or why you included it in the video.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm asking my colleagues, don't distort the words of my residents. Many people in this movement for human rights for Palestinians have always centered around coexistence.
It's centered around coexistence, yes, gee whiz. Anyway, now, Rashida Tlaib was ultimately censured by Congress, but many of her fellow Democrats were furious that the House of Representatives stood up briefly, if only symbolically, for decency. Here's Pramila Jayapal.
It is outrageous. I am embarrassed for those Democrats who voted to censure their own colleague, who voted against free speech. It is an embarrassment.
And note that people who talk about free speech like this are also total opportunists. They call for it, but only as a means to tear down the system that guarantees it. Hakeem Jeffries, a confirmed election denier and leader of the Democrats in the House, said this was all a trick of MAGA Republicans.
The extreme MAGA Republican agenda has nothing to do with the American people. They want to default on our debt, shut down the government, crash the economy, censure Democrats, and avoid holding their own members accountable. This is who they are.
Ah, you see who it is now, MAGA. But for socialist Bernie Sanders, well, it's all a bit complicated.
So when she says from the river to the sea, which the ADL says is anti-Semitic, she says it's aspirational, but the ADL says it is anti-Semitic. Do you want her to stop using terms like that?
Well,
and others.
Donna, you know, it's not what I want and anything else. This is what you got. President Obama just said the other day, I think quite correctly, and we all got to deal with it. This is an enormously complex issue.
Yeah, it's as complicated as the tax arrangements on your multi-million-dollar property portfolio, Bernie, I'm sure. But for pure unhinged lunacy, well, you can't go past, you guessed it, Ilhan Omar.
What is true here is that every single one of them has not acknowledged the fact that Palestinians are dying in the tens of thousands, but will continue to say it is us who are not acknowledging humanity. Rashida will stand strong.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
The movement will continue for liberation until every single
Gentlelady's time has
Palestinian
expired.
has the right to
Gentleman
live
from
in
Maryland
liberty.
is recognized.
I highlight all of this, of course, because it shows how morally vacuous the left has become on the subject of Israel and anti-Semitism. Because it now sees things only through the lens of colonizer and colonized, it cannot make any moral distinctions between Hamas, a terror organization that deliberately rapes, murders, and butchers civilians, and Israel, which is trying to eliminate Hamas and would have likely done so by now were it not trying to avoid killing so many of the women and children and civilians Hamas uses as human shields.
Well, James, as you said, we have our own competition here for the craziness of Ilhan Omar and others, and that is, of course, Penny Wong, already a poster girl of the Quds network, where they'll be showing her again, no doubt, with pleasure, because only a few seconds ago on Insiders, the other show, she called for a ceasefire. Basically, the ceasefire ended on October 6th. That's when the ceasefire ended, when Hamas butchered, raped and murdered. Here are some of Penny Wong's comments only a few minutes ago calling for a ceasefire. Shame on her.
What I would say is we all want to take the next steps towards a ceasefire, but it cannot be one-sided.
Oh, she said a lot more than that, Rowan.
Rita, tell us what she said.
She said a lot more than that. She's called on Israel to be proportionate, which is one of the most gutless things. What does she want the IDF to do? Go into Gaza and behead 40 babies and rape a bunch of women? That's proportionality. But can I directly quote her, because I don't want to overemphasize that. What she has said to me is utterly shocking. She said, "We're particularly concerned with what is happening with medical facilities. I would make this point in relation to hospitals and medical facilities, that international humanitarian law does require the protection of hospitals, of patients and of medical staff." Fair enough, but she goes on. "And we do call on Israel to cease the attacking of hospitals. What? We understand the argument that Hamas is burrowed into civilian infrastructure. But as you know, I think the international community, looking at what is occurring in hospitals, would say to Israel, these are facilities protected under international law."
She's clueless. She's a disgrace. We'll come back to this point. She's an utter disgrace. But let's go to the States now to speak to our Middle East expert, senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, Michael Duran. Michael, always great to see you. Those were the comments from our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, basically playing the line about, oh, Israel's got to stop attacking. What do you make of those comments, Mike Duran?
Well, a ceasefire. Well, first of all, great to be back with you guys. It's been a long time since I've seen you all together. I keep seeing you as individuals. I was afraid that you were no longer a team.
Oh, no, we're a team.
no.
Don't forget, don't worry about that. It's just Rita likes a bit of self-promotion there, that's all.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But,
she deserves
rightly
it. She
so,
deserves
too,
it.
rightly so. Mike,
Yeah.
carry on.
So a ceasefire plays into the hands of Hamas, of course, but also Iran. The goal of Iran now, it's shelling through its proxies. It's shelling American air bases, trying to put pressure on the United States to impose a ceasefire, because they want to leave Hamas as an active threat to Israel. They want it to still be able to fire rockets into Israel. They want to prevent Israel from completely wiping out Hamas in the north, and they want to stop it in the north, and they don't want it to. I'm talking about the north of the Gaza Strip. They don't want it to go south to Han Yunis, where Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, is in a bunker right now.
James.
So tell us, more about this situation with Iran, because they're the root of all evil here, Mike. And explain, please, to our viewers how Iran has been empowered by successive American administrations, first the Obama administration and now the Biden administration, which is essentially running the third term of the Obama administration. And talk to us about these 40-plus, I think there's been 42 strikes that we've barely heard about that Iran has made on the United States. Will the United States get drawn further into this conflict, or will they just take these sorts of attacks and hope that the situation doesn't escalate?
Well, they're in a real dilemma, the Biden administration. It's not clear to me how much they understand the dilemma they're in. They have a conception about how to work with Iran and stabilize the Middle East that just isn't working. Their idea was that you come to an accommodation of Iran on the nuclear file, an agreement from them, a gentleman's agreement from them that they won't go over 90% enrichment. And in return, the United States has turned a blind eye to the oil sales to China, for example, which are now over $60 billion. So with the right hand, the United States has been enriching Iran. It has also been recognizing Iran's positions in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and so on through its proxies, to whom it's providing missiles, drones, and ballistic missiles. This is part of the reason that Iran is getting more powerful, even when you see how illegitimate it is at home and how weak it is at home. It has this complex of conventional military strengths, the ballistic missiles, and drones. It puts them together in the same strike package, and those can overwhelm the air defenses of any power in the world, including the United States and including Israel. This is an offense-dominant regime they have. It means, if I have a pistol, you have a Kevlar vest, I can shoot 6 bullets at you, your Kevlar vest will stop 5, but the 6th is going to get through. So you can't deter Iran with purely defensive means. And that has been the Biden administration's policy. Whenever Iran has threatened, say, Saudi Arabia, the U.S. has come in and tried to cut a deal with Iran and Yemen, which meant restraining Saudi Arabia in return for a quiet life from the Iranians. But ultimately, the Iranians just used their puppets to carry out kind of salami tactics against America's allies, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and now Israel. This is what's happening. So this combination of the nuclear threat and the rising conventional threat is one that can only be dealt with by the United States actually deterring Iran with its allies, but the Biden administration doesn't want to do it.
Realistically, how far away is Iran from having nuclear weapons, and what would that regime with nuclear weapons be capable of?
Well, it's just a few weeks away from having enough fissile material to build several nuclear weapons. So far, we don't know that they've been able to build a warhead and actually build a deliverable bomb. I think the experts on this assume that if they really put their mind to it and said that they wanted to go for it, they could probably get there in about 6 months. It depends on which expert you talk to, because no one is really quite sure about this warhead question, but no one believes that the warhead is out of their reach. So we're talking months if they did it. And what it means, Rita, is that this offense-dominant regime by which I mean a military balance that favors offensive action. It will be a super empowered offense-dominant regime if it's backed up with a nuclear deterrent, and it will mean that everyone in the Middle East will be afraid of Iran, and they will all hedge in the direction of Iran and in the direction of China, which is what we see happening already.
And just very quickly, Mike Duran, before we go, I just want to ask you again why Penny Wong, our foreign minister's comments urging a ceasefire, are so recklessly dangerous.
They're wrong because they are going to. It will lead to a victory for Iran. It will lead to a victory for Hamas. If Hamas retains its ability to strike at Israel, that's a victory. Israel has the south of Israel is depopulated as a result of the October 7th attacks. The north of Israel is depopulated as a result of Hezbollah's attacks. If there's a ceasefire now, Israel will not be able to bring Jews back to the southern part of the country and the northern part of its country. People won't go back as long as they feel that they're just a few hundred yards away from Nazis who can attack them. So this is not how Israel wants this to end, and it's not how the West should want it to end, because it will end badly for us. It will just empower Iran, encourage it to do this again and again and again.
Mike Duran, always great to chat to you, and we'll chat to you very soon again. Thanks so much for coming back on Outsiders. And that's Mike Duran. He used to work in the White House there, and he knows what he's talking about. Penny Wong, shame on you. We'll talk about those comments more after the break. In a tick. Hello, you're watching Outsiders, Weather and the Skeptics Ice Age Watch, the show that takes its inspiration and scientific guidance from the profound words and observations of the man who's not afraid to roll up his trousers to prove a point, the former socialist and now Secretary General of the United Nations and globalist pant-sweater, Antonio Guterres.
Humanity is in the hot seat.
Oh, in the hot seat, if you say so, sir. But regardless, this week did see a massive 30 inches of snow falling in Alaska, according to powderchaser.com, and significant amounts of early season, yes, early season, that means before the normal season, snow has fallen, with more on the way after the heavy snow of the past few days. In places, 1 metre of snow fell, with the freezing level down to 1,500 metres in some areas. The Northwest Alps will see the most, with another 50 to 80 centimetres of new snow possible in the northern French Alps, as the Avoriaz Resort Twitter account itself proudly boasts, Avoriaz, on n'a pas encore vu d'aurore boréale la nuit, mais on a vu des sacrés paquets de neige le jour. 45 à 50 centimetres dans la station. And here you can see someone helpfully measuring all that snow to accumulate some helpful climate data. More about that in a second. Tour operators and agents also report a rise in inquiries following the fresh snow in the Alps and colder temperatures in the UK. Quote, I'm very excited to see this much snow already and more to come in the forecast, said Zach Brown from Ski France. Let's hope it's the start of a fantastic season to come. Others agree with him. Quote, it's absolutely chucking it down with snow in the Alps at the moment, and let's hope it signals a great winter ahead, said Cathy Rankin from the French accommodation provider Pierre et Vacances. But now, before we get too carried away, here's a word from our sponsor.
The era of global warming has ended. The era of global boiling has arrived.
Thank you, sir. Global boiling, ouch. Oof, no doubt Senor Guterres will have been delighted by the Climate Central report that came out yesterday, claiming that the planet has experienced the hottest 12 months on record. And it introduced me to some exciting new terms that I wasn't hitherto familiar with. You might drop them into conversation, be very trendy. Climate fingerprints, ooh, sounds a bit yucky. And heat streaks. They sound unpleasant. Anyway, where was I? Oh, yes. Good news in Ishkal, where, and I quote, Die Pistenpreparung uns Arbeiten in der Silvretta Arena haben begonnen. Or as ski buff Jochen Renders put it, in slightly less technical language, ready to rock and roll on the snow. On the same Twitter feed, another ski fan, Jolyon Marsh, wrote, hopefully the 43 school children I'm bringing with me will not clog up the piste. Obviously, Jolyon didn't read The Guardian back in the year 2000. Otherwise, he would know that according to global warming expert Dr. David Viner, a senior climate researcher at the Climate Research Unit of the University of East Anglia, that, quote, within a few years, winter snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event because children just aren't going to know what snow is. So convinced were the British public by this self-evidently idiotic prediction that the famous toy store Hamleys on Regent Street that year, back in 2000, chose not to put any sledges on display for fear of triggering the kiddies at Christmas. I wonder what they put in their place instead. Surfboards, beach umbrellas, perhaps? And now, another word from our sponsor.
The air is unbreathable. The heat is unbearable.
So you say, Antonio. Nice work. But where was I? Oh, yes, my thanks to the Outsiders fan who sent in this article this week from the ABC Southeast, no less. At Bengaluru Beach, the longest-running coastal study in the Southern Hemisphere finds nature is the best healer, was the enticing headline. Well, you had me there. The story then went on to explain how Bengaluru Beach looks like any other typical Australian shoreline, but among coastal geographers, it's globally renowned for providing the longest continual data set of beach change in the Southern Hemisphere. You see, since 1971, two professors from the ANU, no less, have been busy measuring the beach and studying the sand erosion using tripods and a measuring rod to calculate changes in sand volume and beach profile at the 4 key points, often wading into the water, a bit like Antonio Guterres, I guess, and sometimes treading water for accuracy. For decades, they have snapped photos and jotted down measurements and field sketches in their notebooks. And now a University of New South Wales coastal science expert has picked up the baton and he's carrying on this invaluable work for this globally important study. Good man. Now here's the new team, hard at work.
It's gone up by about 1 millimetre. Rising sea levels. You got it? I've got it. 3 mil. 3 mil.
Oops, sorry, my mistake. That was actually an Outsiders sketch from a few years back, my mistake. But still, I wonder, as I often do, what Paul Barry himself thought of that particular sketch.
But it's not just Laurel and Hardy on Sky telling us that man-made global warming is a joke, or a massive beat-up, or there's no point in Australia taking action.
Good point, Paul. Couldn't have put it better myself. But anyway, back to the real heroes of this story, our gallant erosion measurers. So what did they learn? And I'm quoting from the ABC here, Paul Barry, your very own organisation, so it must be accurate, folks. Well, during the intense La Nina storm period of 1974 to 1976, for example, the equivalent of 12 concrete trucks worth of sand was removed from every metre strip of the beach. Oh my goodness. But wait, hold your seahorses. Can you believe it? Over the next 6 years, the professors noted that the beach regained the sand it had lost during the 70s. As the professors pointed out, quote, with storms, the sand goes offshore, but the sand comes back again. Well, knock me down with a seagull's feather. According to no less an authority than the ABC, quote, Bengaluru showed us how sand can recover. Nature is the best healer. But here's the punchline. Quote, what this half-century of data reveals is the staggering resilience of nature and what the future may hold for Australian coastlines. The resilience of nature. All that measuring and all that beach pretty much more or less exactly the same now as it was back in the 70s. But, where's the climate change? Don't worry, kiddies. As one of the scientists explains, we don't yet see a very clear signal of sea level rise. It's only been 50 years. Oh dear, all that hard work. But, there's always a but, wait for it. But my sense is that it's going to appear in the next 50 years. Of course it is. My sense is that the sea level rise, which hasn't occurred in the last 50 years, will occur in the next 50 years. Just don't hold your breath. Or as Bob Marley used to say, you can fool the people some of the time.
You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time. And now you see the light. What you gonna do? Stand up for your right.
So, as revealed here on Outsiders earlier, Penny Wong has called for a ceasefire, in my opinion, disgracefully, on the ABC this morning. Rita, what else has she said?
She's also called on Israel to cease attacking hospitals because apparently that's what hospitals do. Let's just have a listen.
They do burrow in civilian infrastructure. We understand that. But that does not obviate the requirement to observe international law. And I think that the fact is many friends of Israel around the world and in Australia would be saying, you know, we want civilians, hospitals to be protected.
Penny Wong here is completely misinformed. I don't know whether it's her bureaucrats in DFAT who are not doing a good job and not telling her the truth about this, but I wanted to just share a little bit from the International Humanitarian Law and Article 19 of the Geneva Convention, which states that when it comes to hospitals and other medical facilities, that the protection shall not cease unless they are used to commit outside their humanitarian duties acts harmful to the enemy. Now, as soon as you start using these hospitals to fire rockets, to have headquarters, to host tunnels, do everything that Hamas is doing, when you start doing that, that hospital becomes, I'm sorry, Penny Wong, a legitimate military target. And we know that Israel does everything it can to warn people to get out of the way when they're coming, but you cannot allow Hamas to win this thing because they're going to hide behind international law. This is not the civilization that Penny Wong is trying to defend here. And on proportionality, it does not mean this whole nonsense about death counts. It means that if you're going to do things that wind up with a civilian casualty, the military outcome has to be worth it. Penny Wong is completely wrong on this. She is de facto taking Iran's side on this. It is a disgrace.
Really, it's hard to discern where what she just said today, this morning, differs from what we're seeing from the Palestinian protesters out on the streets. She's accusing Israel of attacking hospitals, saying cease attacking hospitals, acknowledges that they are used by Hamas, and yet is trying to say that that is some sort of a breach of humanitarian law. I mean, this is...
It's morally confused.
This is morally confused, but it is not what you would expect from the foreign minister of a serious country.
She's already been applauded by the Quds network. They've had her up on their social media before. Penny Wong is no friend of the Jews. Labour is no friend of the Jews. Jewish communities, when they are preaching this sort of ceasefire stuff. The ceasefire ended on October 6th when Hamas invaded and butchered and murdered and raped innocent civilians. Hamas must be destroyed, finished, taken care of. Penny Wong, you are wrong. And all Australians must now know that Labor is no friend of those who stand against Hamas. If you want to support Hamas, Labor, well done. That's it for Outsiders. We'll be back next Sunday morning at 9 a.m. Shame on you, Penny Wong. Bye.